Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're really diving deep today into the patterns of empires, like how they rise and fall.
Yeah, fascinating stuff.
It really is, and to guide us, we've got Ray Dalio's Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, which is quite a mouthful.
It is.
But I think his background is really interesting, building Bridgewater Associates, this massive investment firm.
Absolutely. And that perspective really comes through in his writing. He doesn't just look at history as, dates and names.
Yeah.
He's looking at the actual, underlying forces that shape wealth and power.
So it's a different take on history.
Totally, yeah.
Okay, so Dalio talks about this big cycle thing.
Right.
Can you kind of break that down? What's the big idea there?
So the big cycle, it's kind of like Dalio's framework for understanding how these empires not just rise and fall, but how they go through these periods of economic booms and then, they decline. There's this cyclical nature to it. And he believes, there's actually a pattern to it.
So it's not just random.
He doesn't think so. He's identified 18 different factors, these kind of determinants of power, that he thinks contribute to an empire's trajectory.
18. Okay, we definitely don't have time to go through all 18.
No, not all 18, but you can think of it like, building a house. There are certain key things you need, like a foundation.
Okay, I like that.
So he highlights 8 key factors that are crucial. Education and innovation, those are big ones.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Economic output, obviously, how much wealth is the empire generating?
I have money.
Exactly. Technological prowess, are they on the cutting edge? How strong is their military? Can they defend themselves?
Right, gotta have a good defense.
And then how much are they a global trade hub? So how connected are they to the rest of the world? And then financial power.
Okay, so what does that mean? Financial power.
Yeah. So for example, having the world's reserve currency.
Reserve currency. Okay. Explain that to me like I'm 5.
Okay. So imagine the currency that everyone wants to hold because it's seen as the most stable. Historically, that's shifted between empires. Think about what currency dominates today. That's a pretty good indicator of who's in charge, at least economically.
So it's like kind of holding the keys to the kingdom.
You could say that, yeah. And when those keys change hands, big shifts in global power tend to follow. But those 18 factors, they're all interconnected. It's not like they exist in isolation. If one thing changes, it can create ripples across everything else.
So it's this giant complex system.
Totally, yeah. And that's where these 3 primary cycles that Dalio talks about come in.
Okay.
He calls them long-term debt and capital market cycles, internal order cycles, and external order cycles.
Okay, those are big words.
I know. But they all work together, and understanding them is kind of key to understanding how these empires rise and fall.
So let's start with, I guess, maybe the scary-sounding one. Long-term debt and capital markets.
That sounds a little intimidating, right?
Yeah.
It's all about how an empire manages, or often mismanages, its money. Think booms and busts, reckless lending, too much debt, all that fun stuff.
Sounds a little too familiar.
Right. It's about financial stability. The Dutch Empire in the 17th century is a really good example of what happens when that stability gets, let's just say, a little shaky.
Okay, so that's 1 cycle down, 2 to go. What about this internal order cycle?
So this one's all about what's happening inside the empire.
I got it.
How strong is their social fabric? Is there a lot of inequality? How effective is their government? All that good stuff.
So is the empire unified?
Exactly, because a strong, unified empire is much more resilient to, external threats.
That makes sense.
But when you have, social cohesion breaking down, inequality skyrocketing, people losing faith in their institutions.
That's never good.
It's not good.
Yeah.
That's when things start to get shaky. These internal struggles, they can really weaken an empire from the inside out.
Makes sense, like setting the stage for
disaster, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And that brings us to that 3rd cycle I mentioned, external order.
Okay.
So this one's all about the competition and conflict between these major powers. So, geopolitical rivalries, maybe they're fighting over resources, or just that constant jockeying for global dominance.
Yeah, the classic power struggle.
Exactly.
So we've got all these moving parts, internal pressures, external threats, booms and busts. Oh my, it's a lot.
It really is. It's like, trying to juggle flaming chainsaws while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Something's got to give eventually, right?
Yeah, that's a terrifying image.
Yeah.
So how about we bring this big cycle theory down to earth a bit? Can we look at some real-world examples?
Absolutely. Let's start with the Dutch Empire back in the 17th century. They were the real deal, dominating global trade. They had this powerful navy, a strategic location, and they really pioneered financial innovation. Like, they established the Bank of Amsterdam, which was one of the earliest central banks in the world.
Yeah, they were top dog for a while there. So what happened?
Well, that success kind of, uh, I don't know if I'd say went to their heads, but they started engaging in a lot of, shall we say, risky lending. Remember that whole debt cycle we were talking about?
Oh, yeah. That's never a good sign.
It's not. And things took a turn. They ended up with a ton of bad debt, internal conflict started brewing, and their social cohesion, that whole, like, are we on the same page as a nation thing that started to weaken too. Ultimately, it all caught up with them, and their financial system went kaput. That Bank of Amsterdam, the very thing they were lauded for, it collapsed.
Wow. So even being ahead of the curve, financially speaking, isn't a guarantee of success.
Exactly. And when their financial dominance went, well, so did their hold on the world's reserve currency.
Right. So if the Dutch guilder wasn't the top dog anymore, who took over?
That leads us perfectly to our next example.
Yeah.
The British Empire. They kind of picked up where the Dutch left off, right?
Yeah. World domination, here we come.
Well, they certainly made a good go of it. They were like the masters of innovation during the Industrial Revolution, which obviously propelled them to become this global superpower in the 19th century. And they definitely understood the importance of that reserve currency. The British pound became the currency to have.
But it's all cyclical, right? So what led to their decline?
Well, just like the Dutch, their financial success kind of came back to bite them. They ended up with rising debt, tons of social unrest brewing back home, and of course there were new kids on the block starting to make waves, like that little colony across the Atlantic. Remember them?
Huh. Yeah, the United States, you can't talk about empires without mentioning the U.S. It's like they followed a similar path, global superpower status, but now maybe potentially facing their own decline. Is that what Dalio argues?
You're getting it. After World War II, the U.S. was in a league of its own. Economically, militarily, they were at the top. And of course, the U.S. dollar became the world's new favorite reserve currency. But Dalio's point is that no one, not even the U.S., is immune to this big cycle. He sees a lot of the same factors that spelled trouble for past empires cropping up again. Debt's piling up, the country is more politically divided than ever, and there's a new contender for that top spot on the global stage.
Okay, you can't just say that and not tell us who it is. Who are we talking about here?
China, of course.
Right, China. It's like they've come out of nowhere, at least for those of us who aren't historians, and they're shaking things up.
China's really interesting because they've actually lived through this whole big cycle thing multiple times. We're talking thousands of years, multiple rises and falls. They've seen it all.
Wow. So they're like the old sage of empires at this point. Seen it all, done it all.
Basically. And all that experience has really shaped how they view the world. For example, they haven't forgotten what Dalio calls the century of humiliation.
Well, what now?
The century of humiliation. It was a period of decline for China back in the 19th and early 20th centuries. They were basically exploited and, well, humiliated by Western powers and Japan.
Okay, I can see why they call it that. Not a fun time, and I guess probably a big motivator for them now.
Definitely. It's driven their push for economic growth and that global influence we were talking about. Their resurgence has been kind of mind-blowing, actually. Economic reforms, a laser focus on technology, strategic partnerships. They're playing the long game.
But that puts them head-to-head with the U.S., right? That can't be good.
It's definitely creating tension. Dalio sees the U.S.-China relationship as one of the biggest, let's say, question marks in the current world order. It's a competition, economically, technologically, you name it. And then there's the whole Taiwan issue.
Right. Taiwan, that seems like it could be the spark that really lights the fire. Does Dalio talk about that?
He does, and he doesn't beat around the bush.
Yeah.
Dalio sees Taiwan as a potential trigger for a major conflict between the U.S. and China. It's a complex situation.
Yeah.
I mean, China views Taiwan as a breakaway province, a core part of their national identity. And the U.S. has pledged to support Taiwan's defense, so it's complicated.
Yeah, that's an understatement. But this brings up a good point. Is understanding history, these cycles, is it really about trying to see the future? Is that even possible?
Well, if we could actually see the future, we'd be, billionaires by now.
Yeah.
But there's a reason why people say history repeats itself, right? There are patterns to human behavior, to how societies rise and fall.
So it's more like we're looking for clues, trying to get a sense of what might be coming next.
Exactly. And if we can learn from the past, maybe, just maybe, we can avoid making the same mistakes over and over again. We're not saying it's easy, but it's definitely worth thinking about.
That is a lot to process. So where do we go from here?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. But I think the first step is awareness. Understanding that these cycles exist, that they've shaped the world we live in today, and that they'll continue to shape our future whether we like it or not.
I like to think knowledge is power.
Me too. And the more we know, the better equipped we are to face whatever comes next.
So what should people be paying attention to? Like, how do we actually use this big cycle thinking to understand what's happening in the world today?
Well, Dalio talks about these indicators, these signs of potential shifts in the global landscape, kind of like those things meteorologists look at to forecast the weather. No guarantees, but definitely worth keeping an eye on.
I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so give us a few examples. What kind of warning signs should we be on the lookout for?
Well, rapid technological advancements are a big one. I'm talking about the kind of things that completely change the game. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, biotech. These breakthroughs could reshape entire industries and even the balance of power. It's a little wild when you think about it.
It's true. It seems like there's something new every day, which is exciting, but also a little unnerving. Like, what does it all mean?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's a good reminder that technology can be used for good or bad. But moving on, another key indicator is, you guessed it, those debt cycles we talked about
Oh,
earlier.
yeah, those are never good.
Not usually.
Yeah.
Excessive debt has toppled empires before and could happen again.
Mm.
So understanding those cycles and watching out for signs like rapid increases in government debt, corporate debt, even household debt, those are all things that can give us a sense of where we are in the cycle and what potential risks are out there.
So it's like keeping an eye on the global credit card bill, making sure no one's about to get declined at the checkout.
Exactly. But it's not just about money. We can't forget those internal social and political dynamics that we were discussing earlier. Dalio puts a lot of emphasis on social cohesion, like how united is a country. Because when you see things like rising inequality, political polarization, people losing faith in their institutions, that's a warning sign.
So even if a country looks strong on the outside, if it's divided on the inside, it's vulnerable.
100%. Those internal cracks create weaknesses that external forces can take advantage of. And that actually brings us to our final set of indicators: shifts in the external order.
Okay, I'm ready. Hit me with it.
This is where we look at the big picture. Escalating international conflicts, the formation of new alliances, major geopolitical realignments. Those are all signs that the balance of power might be shifting on the world stage.
It's like those tectonic plates you hear about in science class. Everything seems fine, and then boom, earthquake.
That's a great analogy. And sometimes those earthquakes are political or economic or even cultural. But the point is, by paying attention to these indicators, we can start to understand the bigger forces at play and maybe even anticipate those shifts rather than being blindsided by them. Makes sense?
It does. Okay, I have to say, I'm a little overwhelmed by all this. Technological revolutions, debt crises, political instability, shifting alliances. It's like the world is one giant game of Jenga, and we're all just along for the ride.
I hear you. It can feel like a lot. But here's the thing. We can't control everything. We're not superheroes. But we can control how we respond to all of this. And I think that's where Dalio's work really shines a light.
Okay, so what's the takeaway here? What are we supposed to do with all this information? How do we not get completely overwhelmed and, like, hide under the bed?
Well, I wouldn't recommend hiding under the bed, although I get the temptation. For me, it's about understanding that while all these cycles, these indicators, they're important to be aware of, the real goal is to cultivate adaptability. We've got to be lifelong learners, always adjusting to a changing world.
So knowledge is power, or maybe knowledge is preparedness.
I like that. It's about being informed, not freaking out. The future is always uncertain. That's part of what makes it so exciting. But understanding the patterns of the past can definitely help us navigate that uncertainty with, a little more confidence.
I am definitely feeling more informed, maybe a little overwhelmed, but definitely more informed after this deep dive. It's one thing to read about history, it's another to connect it to what's happening in the world right now.
Totally. And that's what's so brilliant about Dalio's work. He's not just saying, hey, remember history. He's saying, look around. See those echoes of the past and the present? It's all connected.
Absolutely. And on that note, we'll leave you with this thought. Given everything we've talked about today, these cycles of debt, these internal and external pressures, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing our world? And how can we, as individuals and as a global community, work together to navigate those challenges and create a better future?
Something to think about.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. So we're talking about these big global indicators, but let's bring it down to earth. Like, what can people actually do? I mean, it's not like we can control these massive forces.
No, you're right. We can't, like, single-handedly stop a recession or prevent a war, but that doesn't mean we're powerless.
So what's the right move then?
For me, it comes down to this. Understanding these cycles, recognizing those indicators, it's about building awareness. But the ultimate goal is adaptability.
Okay, I like that. Adaptability.
Right. We've got to be flexible, ready to adjust, because the world is changing faster than ever.
And how do we do that? How do we become more adaptable?
It's about being a lifelong learner,
Hmm.
staying curious, staying informed, not being afraid to admit when our assumptions are wrong or when the world throws us a curveball.
Yeah, there have been a few curveballs lately.
Tell me about it. But seriously, the more we understand history, the better equipped we are to face whatever comes next. We may not be able to control the waves, but we can learn to surf.
I love that. So it's not about predicting the future, it's about being prepared for whatever the future holds.
Exactly.
This has been amazing, seriously. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on, well, everything.
That's what we were hoping for.
But I'm also a little, I don't know, maybe overwhelmed. Where do we even go from here? What are we supposed to do with all this knowledge about empires and cycles and indicators?
Well, first of all, don't panic.
Easy for you to say.
But really, knowledge is power. And the more we know, the better decisions we can make, both individually and as a society.
So what you're saying is don't just listen to this deep dive and then go back to scrolling through social media. Actually, like, think about it. Apply it.
Exactly. Think about those big challenges we're facing today, whether it's climate change or political polarization or economic inequality. And ask yourself, how can we use this knowledge, this understanding of history, to create a better future? It's not easy, but it's definitely worth it.
I like that. A call to action. I think we can all get behind that.
Absolutely.
Well, on that note, I think we're just about out of time.
Time flies when you're talking about empires.
It really does. But we have to leave our listeners with something to ponder, right? So here's a final thought. What does all of this mean for you? How do these cycles, these forces that shape history, how do they show up in your own life? And what choices, even small ones, can you make today that might ripple out and create positive change? Something to think about.
Big questions for sure.
They are, but we have faith in our listeners. They're smart, they're engaged, they care about the world. That's why they listen to the show.
For sure.
Until next time, everyone, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. And we'll see you on the next deep dive.